I'd like to introduce Oliver Hartley, who's Managing Director of ePho. I will let Oliver explain the name to you. I think Oliver's known to a lot of people in the audience. Oliver's 20 years of experience in solar energy. I think well known now in Australia as a former Managing Director of Hanwha Q-Cells. Premium and been operating in the premium end of the market. Prior to that, Oliver was CEO of a thin film solar company, Calixo, in Germany, as well as being a board member and the chairman of a number of solar manufacturing companies in Europe. Quite a lot of experience in R&D and strategic business development, sales, marketing, and project management. You've been working where in the UK, Germany, Australia, anywhere else? And a PhD from UNSW, which is always, be careful the questions you ask from somebody who has a PhD from UNSW, and an MBA as well. I'm frightened now. So Oliver, that's too many qualifications. Let's get you started, and welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, cheers. I think what Simon just demonstrated quite well is how some companies have made the transition successfully from residential to commercial. But I think Simon also highlighted quite nicely that it's actually quite a difficult journey in some ways. And I do apologize. I'm going to have a bit of a dig at some of the other companies that are out there trying and pretending they're doing commercial solar, but they're really not. They're just building larger residential system on commercial roofs. So I will talk about this long and windy road from residential to larger. So in the next 15 minutes, first of all, just one slide quickly on what is ePho and who is ePho, but then mainly the commercial solar in perspective, where we're going, and then getting the fundamentals right for commercial solar before we then I encourage you to get some of these fundamentals rights to really then develop the commercial sector. So ePho is a company that is completely specialized on commercial solar, so we never did residential. The team is a team of experts that came actually from the utility scale. All in all, I think within the team, we've probably delivered about 60 or 70 megawatts of large-scale solar, engineered almost 200 megawatts worldwide, not in Australia, but in other parts of the world. But we'll come with that mindset and apply that to the commercial solar world. So commercial solar, I think everybody's talking about it. Every company is trying to get into that sector, and there are so many companies out there. But you see this graph here, which I took from Tristan's publication in April, that you see a wonderful growth in 2010, 11, 12 on the residential sector. What a boom we had. And now we see it dipping down in 13 and 14. And a lot of people are saying that the decrease in residential is going to get picked up by commercial. Well, I'm not so sure about it. If you look at that graph, commercial is growing, but it's not really booming to a similar rate we had in 2010, 11, and 12. So why is that? Why is commercial solar growing relatively slowly, although we all understand that the underlying economics and the value proposition is quite good for some of the businesses? And I put this down to what I call getting the fundamentals right. And I've sort of grouped it into three categories: the credibility, reliability, and trust. And credibility is really before the project. It's about the whole industry being credible and having the right skill to deliver commercial solar systems. Then during the project, being reliable, because we've heard WH&S, project management, approvals, all these factors are extremely important when you do commercial solar. This is different and much more complicated than you have in a residential system. And this might even be when you do only a 10 or 20 kilowatt system. But if you do that on a roof of a large company where WH&S policies are in place, you have to adhere to them, and you have to be able to manage all that process. Then the last bit is obviously afterwards the trust. So in the sales process on commercial solar, you tend to go through the economics. You tend to say what is the return on investment or the cash flow and all these kind of issues. And then really afterwards, you need to be able to demonstrate that to your client that that your system that you installed is really delivering the promises you have given the clients. So I've grouped the next couple of slides along these three areas. First of all, credibility. And I think why this is so important is in a commercial system, you have a lot of stakeholders. And you might not know all these stakeholders. It could be, obviously, you might talk to the CEO or the CFO or the board, but there are accountants in the background to check the numbers. There is the facility manager in the background who needs to nod to that project. You might not ever see them. And these guys have all had experience somehow with solar because one relatives had solar system or whatever, and someone in that group probably had a bad experience with solar. You know, we are all aware that there are some shoddy systems out there. And because you have so many stakeholders, that credibility is so very, very important. So this system here is a commercial solar system, and you pick out the floor. A good chunk of the systems are facing south. They're not even going to see much of the sunlight. It's phenomenal. I have to say, the company that actually installed this system, it wasn't their fault. The system was installed by a company that then went bust, and the company that actually then installed it just picked up the pieces and at least tried to help the client. So it's really, really important to do the right engineering and the right design, because if you don't, it hurts your company, but it hurts the whole industry, and it reduces the credibility of the sector. The other thing is being honest. What happens sometimes is we start relatively early in the sales cycle, and then if other companies come in, sometimes we get proposals sent from competitors to us to review it for the client and give our opinion on them. And in this particular case, we got the entire financial spreadsheet, which was great. So this is a bit of a screenshot there in the middle. And you saw, as you can see, these very, very ambitious or the overestimations on the energy increase here. 10% over the next 5 years, from my point of view, is not very realistic. Also, in this particular circumstance, the client would have not used 100% of the solar electricity because it was a Monday to Friday business. So obviously, Saturdays and Sundays, they would have exported that. So these kind of flaws in the financial models really confuse the client, and it reduces the credibility of the whole sector. Next one, and I'm being absolutely honest here. In some cases, I just want to say skill up or get out. I'm showing here a screenshot on the left-hand side where this company, and a specialized companies in commercial solar allegedly, is saying, to put it simple, I'm quoting here, PV panels use diffuse radiation, sunlight, to harness the energy of the sun and do not rely on direct sunlight. Consequently, solar power remains a viable generation source of electricity even on those common, overcast and rainy days. This guy obviously has no clue how PV works. On the right-hand side, you see a real monitored system. When clouds come over, obviously the solar system will reduce and very, very drastically reduce its output. So this is something which rubs me the wrong way, and I hope it rubs all of you the wrong way as well. This kind of nonsense out there does not help the industry, because if you then go in as a credible company, you have to actually educate the client again and have to go against this kind of nonsense. Then moving on to the reliability part, the stuff whilst you're doing the project. Yeah? I think in commercial, we still have this issue which I'm showing here. There's always someone who can do it cheaper. In commercial, however, it might not even work that more cheaply. Yeah? You have to do some of these minimum requirements with WH&S and all these kind of things, and the engineering side. So one tip, for example, or one mistake that a lot of companies are making is that they don't get the project front-end loaded properly. So classical project management, you start to de-risk the project as much as you can at the beginning of the project, because that's when the costs are still low and you can still change it. If you have to change things later on in the project, costs are much higher because you might have installed gear already and other things. So in this case, for example, is that a lot of companies still don't get the right approvals. In New South Wales, it is very clearly regulated under the State Environmental Planning Policy 2007 that every system above 10 kilowatts, or other way around, actually, systems below 10 kilowatts are generally exempt. If you build a system that is bigger than 10 kilowatts, you need a consent, and you get that consent through the complying development certificate you need to get from the council up to 100 kilowatts, and then over 100 kilowatts. In some cases, you need to get a full DA. But these are little things, and it's not difficult. It's just something that you need to do. You need to go through that process, and you need to have the paperwork in place, and you need to get the council involved. We see that a lot of times that companies have not done that properly, which probably nobody really notices until the client later on might want to do something on his building, and a planner comes along and says, well, do you have approval, or do you have the right paperwork for your solar system? And then he has a problem. The other thing is obviously during the reliability part, when you want to deliver your solar system reliably, get your engineering and your design work done properly. It does need the proper detailed module layout. You do need to do your right shading analysis because you're promising output to the client. You need to have the good full single line diagrams for the grid connection, all that in place. And obviously the client has the right to get a full loss analysis of the system, whether there's any chimneys or trees or something that might cast a shadow over your system. You need to take that into consideration. So all this, again, front-end loading of the project to actually have the reliability tick that you can deliver the system. Then reliability as well. On a residential system, people think they might still be able to get away with markings which I show in the top photographs. Obviously, that is not what you want to see in a commercial system, because it's really about a 25-year investment in an asset, and the client has the right to get the proper system installation done. Then reliability. Even when an installer tries to do the right thing, on the left-hand side, you see that this was an expensive installation. That company put that inverter tightly into this nice little metal box. When I went to the client because they wanted to expand their system, and we opened that metal box, we couldn't even put the hand on that inverter. It was so hot. So clearly the old installer had never looked at the manual, because the manual for this particular inverter clearly specified that you need to have the 20 centimeters gap to get the airflow going. In this case, obviously because of the faulty installation, the client right away lost his warranty, because the manual is linked to the warranty. If you don't install the inverter according to the manual, you lose your warranty. And that brings me to the last bit, is the trust, the monitoring. And I'm telling you, just share a little story with you, and it is the truth. We saw a potential client a couple of weeks ago. He had a 30 kilowatt system on one of the buildings, and he had a monitoring system, a monitoring service from the old installer. The monitoring service was that the installer went to the inverter once a month and took a photograph of the inverter reading and sent that photograph to the client. That was the sophistication of the monitoring system. So that has nothing to do with commercial solar and has nothing to do with building trust. So if you are in the field of commercial solar, you need to provide good monitoring system. And whether it's something like we have an inverter independent monitoring system that provides us with a stream of data constantly, or whether you use some of the inverter manufacturer provided monitoring system, just make sure you get reliable data and you can build that trust. Then the last part really of the discussion I want to throw at you is that doing the installation reliably according to the standards and the manuals is obviously for your company as well, but it's also to enable the client to get any warranties filed later on. This is an installation where you can tell that that installer had didn't pay any attention to the clamping range of the modules, I mean, up there, this is clearly, I don't know if you can see it, clamped at the wrong area of the module. So what does that mean? Basically, the manual, let me go back one sec. The manual here of one of the module manufacturers does clearly say failure to comply with the requirements listed in this manual, blah, blah, blah. So if you fail to comply with the manual, you take away the right to claim warranties for the client. So 10 years, 15 years down the track, the client will not be able to claim his warranty or their warranty. In residential, it didn't really matter that much, and I'm talking here out of experience of a module supplier, because it's only 6 modules or 8 modules, you know, you can do that. But if you have a 100 kilowatt system, so we're talking about $10,000s or maybe $100,000 of modules replacement cost, all of a sudden every module manufacturer will actually look at the system and wants to look at the photographs and everything in detail before he actually accepts the claim. So this is something which is really important. And last but not least is probably, and I apologize to all the suppliers to ePho, because I think we're a pain in the backside for our suppliers. We go and sift through all the documentation that suppliers have. And things like this, where it says we recommend something in the manual, I find it very ambiguous. You know, what does that actually mean? Does the client have the right, if it goes wrong, to claim the warranty? Or do we have to do this, or do we have to do that? If the supplier is not really specific in his manual, and then 10 years down the track you have to go through a legal process because the system is failing, and we have this kind of wording, it's going to be a bit of a difficult fight. So I can only encourage you to actually do the same. We need to also demand from our suppliers to get their paperwork and their documentation in place, because a lot of suppliers just treat Australia as a bit of a backwater, and they just use their US or the European documentation for us, and that's just not good enough. Their documentation has to be compliant for the Australian requirements, and it has to also help us and empower the client to actually get their warranties through. So I think if we do all this, and we upskill, and we develop our business and our sector with credibility and with reliability, and we then build the trust in our client, I then do think, and I'm very, very convinced that the commercial sector will have a great future in Australia, but it's going to be a slow road, and I think we all need to really work together to get that reliability, credibility, and trust out there. Thank you very much.